This follows weeks of rising tension between China and Japan.
Relations between Japan and China are set to be at their lowest point in more than a decade.
Japan just changed forever. On February 8th, 2026, the country didn't just hold an election. It handed Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi from Liberal Democratic Party the biggest single-party victory in the history of modern Japan. A supermajority that gives Takaichi a free hand to do what no leader has done since World War II. The country that once renounced war is now moving at fast speed to build stealth warships, develop long-range cruise missiles, and, for the first time ever, literally rewrite its pacifist constitution. Japan spent $58 billion on defense last year, and that number is about to get a whole lot bigger. China is watching. The markets are jittery, and the world is wondering, is Japan about to become an ordinary military power again? The LDP's coalition partner, the Japan Innovation Party, wants to go even further and delete the clause that renounces war potential altogether. For the first time in 70 years, the question isn't if they can propose a change, but when they'll trigger the national referendum. A Chinese diplomat just told Japan that the dirty head that sticks itself in Taiwan must be cut off. That's an actual quote, posted on social media in 2025 by a sitting consul general. So what exactly is going on between these two countries, and how did we end up here? Let's rewind, because this story doesn't start with missiles and warships. It starts with a piece of paper. For decades, Article 9 was the peace clause that kept Japan's military in a legal gray zone. No army, no navy, no air force. In 1945, Japan had just lost the most devastating war in human history. American officials were running the country during the occupation, and they had one mission: to make sure Japan never did this again. So they wrote Article 9 into the Constitution, and it was pretty simple. Japan renounces war. No army, no navy, no air force. The country that invaded Manchuria in 1931 committed the Nanjing Massacre, ran Unit 731, and terrorized half of Asia was never supposed to touch a weapon again. And honestly, that actually worked for about 3 years. Then Korea happened in 1950, and suddenly America looked at Japan and thought, actually, we kind of need you armed. Just like that, the Self-Defense Forces were born in 1954. It wasn't a military, obviously. It was just a self-defense thing. Totally different. Sure. But over the next several decades, Japan kept stretching that definition further and further. First, it was peacekeeping missions overseas. Then, in 2014, Shinzo Abe pushed through a massive reinterpretation that basically said collective self-defense was perfectly fine. That meant, if America got attacked, Japan could fight back even if nobody had touched Japan itself. A former head of Japan's own Cabinet Legislative Bureau looked at what Abe had done and set it straight: the death of Article 9. And nobody stopped it, nobody reversed it. They just kept going. Every Japanese leader for decades played the same careful game. Build up the military quietly, but don't talk about it too loudly. Keep things ambiguous, and don't give China a reason to escalate. Then, Sanae Takaichi became prime minister, and she clearly did not get that memo. In November 2025, she went on record saying that if China launched military action against Taiwan, something like a naval blockade with warships, Japan would treat that as an existential crisis situation. Under Japan's security laws, that specific phrase triggers the legal authority to mobilize forces under collective self-defense. Previous leaders would have danced around it and given some vague answer about regional stability and monitoring the situation. Takaichi went ahead and said what everyone was already thinking, but nobody was supposed to say out loud, and China absolutely lost it. The Chinese consul general in Osaka, a man named Shui Jian, posted on social media that the dirty head that sticks itself in must be cut off. Just let that sink in for a second. A diplomat on social media is threatening to cut off Japan's head. The post was deleted after Japan protested, but by then, the whole world had already seen it. Both countries summoned each other's ambassadors, and both slapped travel advisories on each other. Beijing sent Coast Guard vessels and military drones through the Senkaku Islands, while China's Commerce Ministry announced that trade cooperation between the two countries was severely damaged. Bipartisan calls erupted inside Japan, demanding the consul general be expelled. Taiwan's government condemned the threat, and the U.S. ambassador to Japan weighed in publicly. Beijing's foreign ministry fired back, saying Japan was deviating from the path of peaceful development and moving further in a dangerous direction. Takaichi tried to walk it back later by calling her comments hypothetical, but it was already too late. The mask was off. And here's what makes this whole thing truly insane. This diplomatic crisis was playing out between two countries that did $322 billion in trade together in 2025. China has been Japan's biggest trading partner since 2005. Nearly 7.5 million Chinese tourists visited Japan in just the first 9 months of that year, and over 123,000 Chinese students were studying there. These two economies are completely stitched together at the hip, and they're publicly threatening each other. You really can't understand any of this without understanding the Senkaku Islands. Japan calls them Senkaku, while China calls them Diaoyu. They're a handful of uninhabited rocks sitting in the East China Sea, and both countries are willing to go to the mat over them. Japan administers them, China claims sovereignty over them, and this whole thing has been boiling for decades. The real escalation hit in 2012 when Japan's government bought 3 of the islets from a private Japanese owner. The prime minister at the time actually did it to prevent Tokyo's nationalist governor from buying them first and doing something even more provocative. But China didn't care about the reasoning. Massive anti-Japanese protests exploded across Chinese cities, trade tanked overnight, and Chinese government aircraft entered the disputed airspace for the first time since 1958. Things never really recovered from that. China now keeps an almost permanent Coast Guard presence near those islands. In August 2024, a Chinese military aircraft actually entered Japanese airspace for the first time in history, circling near the Danzhou Islands before turning back toward the mainland. Then, in July 2025, a Chinese JH-7 fighter bomber flew within 30 meters of a Japanese intelligence aircraft over the East China Sea. At jet speed, 30 meters is not posturing. That's practically a mid-air collision. Japan demanded that China stop these provocations. China responded by telling Japan to stop surveilling what it called routine Chinese military activities. And then, things got even worse. In December 2025, Chinese aircraft locked their radars on Japanese planes during carrier drills near southwestern Japan. For anyone who doesn't know, locking radar is what you do right before you fire a missile. That same year, 2 Chinese aircraft carriers were spotted operating near Iwo Jima for the first time, and Japan formally protested after China began building new structures in the East China Sea in June. Beijing didn't even blink. Now let's talk about what Japan is actually spending its money on, because this is where you really start to see how serious all of this has gotten. For decades after the war, Japan capped its defense spending at just 1% of GDP. The strategy was dead simple. Let America handle security, host around 50,000 US troops on Japanese soil, and focus all your energy on building the economy. Under Abe's nearly decade-long leadership, that number crept up to about 1.1%. But under Takaichi, Japan is on track to hit 2% of GDP by March 2026, which is 2 full years ahead of schedule. And there's already growing pressure to push even higher after NATO adopted a new target of 5%. The latest defense budget blew past 9 trillion yen, which comes out to roughly $58 billion for a single year. That money is going toward long-range cruise missiles, unmanned combat weapons, and coastal defense systems, all designed around something Japan has never officially had before: strike-back capability. The ability to hit the other guy first. Until December 2022, Japan's entire military posture was officially self-defense only. Then, Kishida's government adopted a brand new security strategy that explicitly said Japan needs long-range missiles capable of striking back. And the strategy doesn't mince words about who it's aimed at either. It names China as Japan's biggest strategic challenge, right there in the document. On top of that, Japan has started construction on its first 4 next-generation offshore patrol vessels. These ships are 95 meters long, built with a stealth design to reduce radar signatures, equipped with autonomous navigation systems, and they only need a crew of about 30 people to operate. A total of 12 ships are planned, with the first 4 scheduled for delivery by March 2027. But here's the one that really makes you sit up. A government-commissioned panel has proposed that Japan consider developing a nuclear submarine. This is a country that has maintained 3 non-nuclear principles since the end of the war. The defense minister responded by saying Japan is considering all options. The fact that those words came out of an official's mouth tells you everything you need to know about where this is heading. Japan isn't doing any of this alone, and that might actually be the scariest part for Beijing. Australia announced it's buying 11 frigates based on Japan's upgraded Mogami class for the Royal Australian Navy. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries will build the first 3 ships in Japan, and the rest will be constructed at a shipyard in Western Australia. The whole deal is worth roughly 10 billion Australian dollars. These frigates can sail 10,000 nautical miles without refueling, which is about 4,000 miles farther than Australia's current Anzac-class frigates, and they do it with smaller crews and significantly more firepower. When Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi and Australia's Defense Minister Richard Marles met in Tokyo this past December, they publicly declared strong opposition to any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion in the East China Sea and South China Sea. In diplomatic language, that's about as close as you get to saying, "We see exactly what you're doing, Beijing." Japan is also running joint naval exercises with the Quad alongside the US, Australia, and India. It's participating in AUKUS discussions and developing next-generation fighter jets with the UK and Italy. It's even working on deals to provide maintenance and construction support for American warships. And in late September, the US, Japan, and Australia ran a trilateral air combat exercise called Bushido Guardian, 25 out of Misawa, Japan. And then there's the arms export shift, which might be the biggest signal of all. Japan has historically banned weapons exports entirely, but that's changing fast. Takaichi's revised security policy is expected to scrap the remaining restrictions altogether, and Japan's defense minister has said he wants to eliminate the rules that limited exports to just non-combat categories. A country that was never supposed to have a military in the first place is now positioning itself to become a weapons exporter. Let that one sit for a minute. So here's where we are right now. 2 countries bound together by $322 billion in annual trade and 2,000 years of shared history, and one of them is building strike-back missiles aimed at scenarios involving the other, while the other is flying fighter jets within 30 meters of military aircraft and locking missile radars on planes. Japan's defense minister said it plainly during his inauguration. Japan and the wider Indo-Pacific region face the most severe and complex security environment since World War II. The question at this point isn't whether Japan is rearming, because that's already done. The real question is what happens when China finally decides it's had enough of watching. What do you think about all of this? Let us know in the comments section, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next.